Well, thank you all for being here today, and welcome back to the Senate 2016 version. Today, the Senate Republican Caucus is excited to unveil its agenda for the upcoming legislative session, this historic bicentennial session. I'm joined here today by the various authors of the bills that are the foundation for this agenda. And in a moment, we'll hear from each of them as they explain the meat and potatoes and the details of the goals for their various bills. First, I wanted to provide some general insight into the agenda. First, one of the key goals for our effort is to empower local government initiatives in the areas of transportation and economic development. We propose to do this through several pieces of legislation. One way is through Senator Hirschman's Senate Bill 67, which proposes to inject about $430 million into the local government coffers, 75% of which must be used on local roads, streets, and bridges. The second way is through Senator Kenley's Senate Bill 302, which was filed today, if you haven't seen it, which seeks to fund 3 rather than 2 regional development proposals that have been generated in response to the governor's Regional Cities Initiative. Importantly, neither of Senator Hirschman's proposal or Senator Kenley's proposal will cost 1 penny of new taxes. A second focal point of this agenda is to provide relief to our schools and our teachers from the multiple problems that have arisen from this year's I-STEP test. We're joining together with the House, the Governor's Office, the Department of Education, and the Board of Education to produce 2 bills, one in the Senate and one in the House, both of which will be fast-tracked starting tomorrow with hearings in both the House and the Senate, which will hold harmless for 1 year both teacher pay and school A through F scores from the outcomes of the I-STEP test. We feel this is the fairest way to deal with what we believe are temporary declines in test scores due to both a more rigorous test and unexpected problems with the test itself. And Senator Cruz will explain these bills. Our agenda also includes a proposal to levy tougher sentences on drug dealers who are peddling an increasing amount of deadly drugs into the streets of Hoosier cities and towns. This is a national problem, but it's also a Hoosier problem. The impact is devastating to our state as it is around the country. And it requires a fast and effective response from the legislature. And Senators Michael Young and Jim Merritt will be discussing their respective views and bills on this. We also seek to continue our recent efforts to reach out to Hoosier enlisted soldiers and veterans and their families to ensure that we're doing all we can to help them deal with the difficulties they face when having to serve their country and their state in these increasingly trying times. Senator Jim Banks and Senator Brant Hirschman each have a bill to deal with this issue, and they will explain them momentarily as well. Senator Hirschman also has a bill to bring some permanent clarity and relief to Hoosier farmers with regard to the continuing problems of their property tax bills. The system of taxing farmland is different and more complex than other property, and there's a need to slow down the growth of these taxes permanently, and Senator Hirschman has a plan that's been generated through an effort throughout the summer. I look forward to hearing from him on this issue as well. And finally, Senator Brent Steele has a proposal to inject more fairness and relief into the Patients' Compensation Fund under Indiana's Medical Malpractice Act. This has been a difficult nut to crack. He's been working on this for several years. It involves numerous interested parties and groups. And because Senator Steele was unable to join us today, I get the job of explaining this piece of legislation, and I'll take that on as well. After all the senators have spoken, we'll be happy to answer any of all of your questions. But first, I'd like to ask Senators Hirschman and Kenley to come up here and explain their local government bills. Gentlemen, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Senator Long. I'll be very brief on the part of Senate Bill 67 because we've already had discussions with you folks previously. I would just update this to say that there's been significant support among the members of my caucus. I have a large number of the caucus who have co-sponsored the bill already. I'm pleased to see that there has been broad bipartisan support for the action. It is part of the transportation debate. Obviously, we have to have a discussion about long-term transportation funding, but putting close to $500 million into local communities around this state in an immediate fashion to help them with infrastructure issues at no tax increase, no cost to Hoosier taxpayers, I think makes a very strong statement for our commitment not only to infrastructure but to fiscal responsibility. And I'm pleased that it has generated the attention that it has and that Governor Pence has graciously included it in his legislative agenda as well. I think it bodes well for local units of government seeing a significant influx of money in a short amount of time.
Thank you. I'm carrying Senate Bill 302, which is going to be a continuation of the Regional Cities program effort. This summer, the governor's plan on the tax amnesty program generated more revenues than we had actually budgeted for last year in the budget cycle. And so the Indiana Economic Development Corporation and the governor's office had such an enthusiastic response to the Regional Cities program request for bids on different items that he has asked that the legislature put forth one more program and allow another $42 million, which is within the amount that the amnesty program has brought in, to be used for that purpose. And I'm going to carry that bill, and we hope to persuade the rest of the legislature to go along with us on that. I think it's another example of good economic development. And it's also a creative idea that it ties regions together to work together for economic development rather than just having everybody fight against each other in individual cities.
Yesterday, I introduced Senate Bill 200, which deals with the A through F grading for our school corporations. I'm joined in that bill with Senator Kinley and Senator Mishler. And what we're going to do is that we'll offer legislation that will allow the previous school year grade to be used for the last year school grade, as long as it doesn't go lower. So the bill actually allows the grades to go higher if they score higher last year than the year before, but does not provide them to go lower than they were the year before. And so we think this is good for our school corporations, and we had new standards, new tests, so it takes a little bit for those teachers in the schools to make that adjustment. I think this is good. This is a one-year relief program, and I think it's good for all of our students as well across the state of Indiana.
About the teacher, also the House bill?
And the House will be doing a bill in the teacher evaluation so that the I-STEP test results would not be used in the evaluation of the teachers, so that they basically would use the year before as well in their evaluation for their teacher ratings in their 4 categories.
Thank you. Good morning. Senate Bill 290 deals with some criminal law matters, deals specifically with those who deal drugs. When we did House Bill 1006, we tried to differentiate between people who were merely users and drug dealers, because we wanted to get people who were users help, because we know that that works and they can turn their lives around. However, the way the law is written, you could carry over 30 pounds of marijuana or over 10 grams of a drug, which is more than you could use for personal use, and the prosecutors would need some other evidence to prosecute them as a dealer. So what we've done in this bill that says over 30 pounds of marijuana, 10 grams of hashish, and 10 grams of any other drug, that if you have that on yourself, that's all a prosecutor needs, and they can prosecute you as a drug dealer. Additionally, as we went through 1006, there was an agreement with the prosecutors that we would do away with minimum sentencing on level 2s. However, that just doesn't seem right. I don't think there's any judges that are not giving anybody a sentence, but to ensure that they do get a sentence, those level 2s, it will be a House bill by Representative Sturwall, and I think we may have a couple here, that will say that on those level 2 drug dealers, you have to at least do the minimum sentence. And I just might remind everybody, drug dealers are really doing more time because now they have to do 85% of their sentence. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Long. Senator Young, drug trafficking has to stop in Indiana. We have way too many box trucks moving around on 465 and I-70 and I-65 with illegal drugs. It's a problem. And I'm glad Senator Young is at the helm of this issue, because it has got to stop. If we're going to take care of the heroin problem, if we're going to eradicate the meth issue in this state, we have to get the drugs off the streets. And this is a good start. Right now, maybe a lot of you have recently understood that there was a 3-time convict that was home on house arrest, who was busted for a drug running organization and bringing in drugs and meth from Arizona, just recently. We have a real problem, and we need mandatory minimum sentences. Suspending a sentence cannot be the answer. And I'm looking forward to this session really being one of the factors we have to engage in on the war on drugs in Indiana.
Good morning. Thank you, Senator Long. The Senate Republican Caucus has worked hard over the years to support our Hoosier veterans, but there is more that we can do. The Military Family Relief Fund was created in 2006. Since that time, we've changed the eligibility of the fund, which initially was created to support our post-9/11 veterans. We've changed the eligibility twice, in 2012 and 2014. Yet since that time, the fund has grown a balance of $1.5 million that's carried within the Family Relief Fund. And that we have another Veterans Trust Fund that has grown a balance of $8.3 million. And due to that, and due to the fact that Hoosiers, patriotic Hoosiers who purchase a Support Our Troops or military license plate, expect that those extra dollars that they spend on their license plate go towards supporting Hoosier veterans. This morning, Senator Hirschman and I introduced Senate Bill 295, which would once again expand the eligibility for veterans seeking assistance to access this fund to any veteran who served during a war or conflict. I believe this bill will specifically help our Vietnam veterans in the state of Indiana, the veterans who often deserve and need the most help. They're all mostly senior citizens at this point, and we find that there are a number of them who could benefit from accessing support to help pay their bills through the Military Family Relief Fund. Thank you.
As a complement to Senator Banks' legislation, the fund has been well provisioned due to the generosity of the Hoosiers and their purchase of license plates. But as this eligibility is proposed to be widened somewhat, we want to broaden the opportunity for funds to come into the Military and Family Relief Fund. And one way to do that is a suggestion that was brought to me by the veterans community, which would allow a checkoff box on an income tax return. Currently, many of you are probably familiar, you can designate a portion of your refund to go to the Non-Game Wildlife Fund. This would allow a new provision in which you could donate portions of your tax refund to go to support Hoosier veterans and the Military Family Relief Fund. It's an opportunity to help ensure the fiscal stability of the fund, once again, without raising taxes.
Brad, why don't you go ahead and segue into the ag tax issue?
Thank you, Senator Long. The next issue has to do with farmland taxation, which is an issue that has been studied in recent years in the General Assembly. It's a complicated formula, and I won't go into all the details with you right now, but there have been multiple issues. Changes in soil productivity rankings brought about by the federal government was the first issue we faced. Second of all, if you consider that the farm community does not have the opportunity largely to set its own price, what you overused phrase, a perfect storm of property taxation for Hoosier farmers, insofar as the current system looks back at their prior income in years past in order to set current property tax rates. The result of that has been a dramatically increasing property tax burden for Hoosier farmers at the very same time that their incomes are dropping dramatically. We put in a stopgap measure over the last couple of years to try and prevent that increase while we work together in a bipartisan way for a solution. We studied it extensively in the Interim Study Committee on Fiscal Matters this summer, and we are prepared to propose a bill which will recognize and cap the greater expenses that farmers face via the capitalization rate, which is a component of the overall formula. And I will have a chart for you here shortly, which gives you an idea of what we're looking at. In the next year or so, there probably won't be a great deal of difference in taxes. What this is designed to do is prevent anticipated dramatic increases and change the formula in a lasting way. Yeah, Andy, you can go ahead and pass that out. Thank you. In a lasting way, so that it not only caps the exposure for farmland taxes, but also much more accurately reflects ability to pay and farmers' use of services within their communities. I'd be happy to answer questions on that later. Thanks.
And finally, I will do my best to pinch hit for Senator Steele on the issue of the Medical Malpractice Act in Indiana. Let me say that our caucus is a strong and has traditionally been a strong supporter of this act and remains so. I believe that this law, which has become a model for many other states around the country, has allowed us to have an unusually high level of medical care in the state of Indiana as for a mid-sized state in this country. We definitely benefit from that. It's a great place for a doctor to practice, and all Hoosiers benefit from that, the unusually high level of talent in Indiana from our practitioners. The Medical Malpractice Act is a two-tier concept. Basically, the first $250,000 of a claim, if it is a valid claim, if it's found to be valid and is awarded, comes out of the doctor's own personal insurance policy. Then you go into what's called the Patient's Compensation Fund, and there's an additional $1 million available to a patient. So $1.25 million is the most that anyone can receive under the Medical Malpractice Act if, in fact, someone is found to be a valid claimant. The problem arises in the fact that as costs have grown, the fund is not indexed, and as a result, a catastrophic medical problem today could well exceed the $1.25 million cap. And the concern is that it could eventually be found to be unconstitutional to a plaintiff if, in fact, their damages are substantially higher than $1.25 million. This proposal would raise the physician's level of liability from $250,000 to $450,000. And would index that. And it would also do the same for the Patient's Compensation Fund, raising that from $1.25 million to $1.65 million, and index that as well. The goal is not to punish anyone, is to preserve what I think is an outstanding law, but make sure that it is modernized enough to avoid a constitutional attack, which I think it is vulnerable to, and many people agree. There are a lot of different parties that are interested in this issue. Obviously, the hospitals and the doctors, the insurance companies, and the trial lawyers. All of them are parties. We're close to consensus on that. Senator Steele has worked long and hard on it. I'm proud of the work he's done. We think it's important enough to preserve this law that we've made it a top agenda item, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on that as well. That concludes the individual portion of this. We're happy to answer any questions you have to any of our gentlemen up here.
Senator Long, why didn't the LGBT issue make the Assembly?
Boy, I was ready for that question, Abdul, you might imagine. I'll tell you why, because this represents, we're a 40-member caucus. This represents our caucus's agenda. It's not just an individual one, like you could ask the governor that question, that's his agenda, but this is a group effort, and we don't have consensus on the LGBT bill, understandably so. It's controversial. We have people all over the place on those issues, and we're going to be discussing that, throughout the session, at least the first half of the session. But this represents a caucus position, and we can confidently say we believe our caucus overwhelmingly supports these issues. I can't say that about the LGBT bill. It is an important issue. We don't deny that, and we will be discussing it here in the Senate, as you know. But this is about our agenda for this year, where our caucus has consent, and so that's why it's not on that list.
I have a bill that I'm also introducing dealing with that, and I think Representative McNamara has a bill that deals with that too. So we have two bills being introduced that will help address that problem. We're having a meeting, I think, in 2 weeks with the Indiana Duke Credit Advisory Council meeting, and we'll hopefully come up with some additional recommendations there that might be amendments to bills as we progress during the session. But I do think that's a real issue, and that we need to continue to address that.
Dennis, you might mention that the Senate, for 4 years now, we've had this performance funding model that we're trying to get that money put into the base. Well, on that topic, the Senate starting in 2013, we put performance funding money into our funding model, and we've had $30 million in there the first 2 years, $30 million this year to go to teachers that are outstanding, and next year it'll be $40 million. And so we think we've been working on that problem in advance. The real issue is good compensation for good teachers, regardless of how long they've been there or not. We have suggested to school corporations that we would like to see them put some of that performance award into their base so that you create a ladder that a teacher can see that if they're always performing at a high level, they will receive it. So I know Senator Cruz is going to be working on those issues this year, and I'm sure we'll be doing more in the budget year. But in the end, it's about a good compensation schedule across the board, and I think we need to keep a long-term view on that.
Senator Young, can I ask you a couple questions about the curriculum?
Sure.
First on the weights, are you pretty married to the idea of 30 pounds and 10 grams, or is there some flexibility there to maybe make those a little higher?
Did you talk to Senator Kenley earlier? Because that's the same thing he has. Well, we have to have a starting point, obviously, to have a bill drafted. And as we go through, we'll have a discussion, not only in committee, on the floor, and also in the House. The numbers could change, but we think that that's, looking at it, that's way, well, it's probably the amount that would be more than someone could use for their personal use. That's what we said. It could be higher, could be lower. We'll find out around March the 14th or so.
And then on the mandatory minimums, do we trust judges or do we not trust judges? Isn't mandatory minimum just a way of the legislature saying, oh, look, we're doing something, if you say you trust judges?
Well, we do trust judges, but judges are human like everyone else. They make mistakes. We want to think on this issue, because it's so important, because drugs destroy people's lives, that those people who perpetuate drugs in our society are going to pay this penalty. And if they are convicted of a level 2 crime, they're going to serve a certain amount of time. And so they got that forward to look forward to, that they're just going to be in there. It's not, we don't trust judges or not. We're just saying that on this crime, for this purpose, you're going to serve a minimum amount of time in jail.
Yes.
$400,000 increase in the cap doesn't sound like a lot when you're talking about such a constitutional problem. How significant a change is that?
Well, obviously, there are a lot of parties here that we're trying to get on the same page. We may or may not be able to do that. I'm confident that we're pretty close. So that's a negotiated number. But the fact that it would be indexed, as I understand it, to the future would allow this to grow with cost of living and would reflect, I think, at least that this number will be maintained in the future. Hopefully, it'd be, I believe, indexed to the true cost of medical care, not just the COLA. And so that's a different index. But as we know, medical care is expensive, particularly when it's a catastrophic situation. And we want the fund to reflect the fact that it would be an adequate amount awarded to someone who unfortunately is a victim of malpractice. We're not trying, again, to weaken the process. We're trying to strengthen it to make sure that it remains the great law that I think it has been overall for Hoosiers for many, many years.
Well, obviously, like I said, this is what the caucus agrees as part of the 2016 agenda. On the issue of roads and road funding, where are you guys with respect to what the governor's thrown out with the $1 billion and what your House colleagues have thrown out with, indexing the motor fuel tax and doing some other things?
Well, the House plan isn't yet finalized. I mean, they've talked about some ideas and generalities. We'll wait for that to come out and then comment on it. But I know that the House is trying to push the discussion forward, and it's a discussion we need to have. We don't deny that at all. Whether it's this year or next year will be the debate that we have. But the fact is, every state needs to deal with a dwindling amount of money for its infrastructure. We all have needs. We all need to build our bridges and our roads and maintain them, and highways. And in Indiana's case, we're adding new highways here, and that's a good thing, or new lanes to our interstates. We need to do that. And we all know that. How do you pay for it? And that's the key. That being said, we put an unbelievable amount of money into our roads in the past decade, and we're going to have a record year next year for that. It's not that we're not investing. It's just that we need to find a long-term answer to that investment. So the question will be, as we debate these short-term answers with regard to, injecting some money locally, and the governor's, which is a 4-year plan, do we need to do more? And I think we do. Whether it's this year or next will be the debate. But no one's avoiding that discussion. It's a matter of when, not if.
So $1 per pack of cigarettes, tax increase, is that something that's palatable?
Well, I want to see what, exactly what it's tied to and everything else. That's been tossed out there as a discussion point, but I haven't seen it formally in a piece of legislation yet, so we'll wait to see that before we comment on it.
In general, would any of you vote for a tax increase?
That's a good question, and I think that's part of the debate. You know, do you build consensus for this? Is it there yet? You know, is the public ready for this? Is the public aware of the, and has it been, the discussion deep enough, both at the local and state level, and educational enough that the public says, you know, we think we need to do something. That's building consensus, and we've done that on issues like property tax reform. We took 18 months of really intense discussion about that and by the time we were done, people coalesced on both sides, ours and D's, around a solution. That may be what's needed here. We're going to wait and see, but it's too soon to say what people will or won't support. I do think a foundation has to be laid and the case be made for the fact that it's needed.
Is there any plan for a study of local growth needs, the amount of money that we would need, looking more long-term?
Well, that's part of the question, is exactly what is the monetary need? And, you know, have you established exactly what it's going to cost in the future, and do we know that this amount is going to have to be raised? Do we have a variety of resources, out there beyond just a gas tax that we might want to explore, which is a legitimate discussion as well. And this is a national discussion. And I was lucky enough when I was out in Washington for the National Conference of State Legislators to be in the new Speaker's office, and he brought this topic up just after they had passed the transportation bill. And he said, look, the transportation bill is funded through 2020, but beyond that, every state and the federal government has a tremendous challenge to find some new resources, because the gas tax just isn't going to cut it anymore. We just can't keep raising it and hoping that that's going to be the answer, because it's not. Because technology is racing forward. We have electric cars, we have hybrid cars. We're going to have different things we've never imagined powering our vehicles in the future. And if we're tied to the gasoline, to the gallon of gas as the resource, that's not a very good system anymore. We all know that. It's a matter of us getting our heads wrapped around what the right answer is and building consensus for an answer. Again, this is a 50-state issue. We're all going through it, and Indiana is no different.
How long? There are a number of bills in both the House and Senate on gun issues. One of them that's very, I guess, new or interesting is getting rid of the license to carry altogether in Indiana. How do you feel about that?
We haven't had any discussion on that. To be honest with you, I want to read the bill more carefully before I have any comment on it. I know that you're talking about Senator Thomas's bill. He hasn't discussed that with anyone or anybody in our caucus, so there's no caucus discussion on it yet. So I'll just let that lay for now until we have a chance to absorb it and discuss it as a caucus. Well, we are here today to talk about our agenda, and I'm not faulting you for asking that question, Nikki, but I'd like to focus on these issues today if we can. But if you have other questions, we'll try to do our best on that as well. But that one, we're just not ready to answer. We've just got to read it and talk about it.
Senator Long,
Yes.
and I guess Senator Kelly too, on the regional cities, how much agreement is there within the Senate to add funding for that third state?
Well, I think there's support for it. There was good support for it last year. We had a program that called for $84 million, 42 for 2 regions to support it. As Senator Kenley said, there's additional money that's been brought in. It's funded by this tax amnesty program, and it's been very successful, more so than we anticipated. We have the money to do that without raising anyone's taxes or tapping the general fund to do it. And so I think there'll be support for it. But, we haven't sat around, talking about it as a legislature. But the general concept we strongly support, and I think there'll be support for it in our caucus, but without much question.
Do you know if you have the flexibility to spend that on anything, or is it bookmarked specifically for regional city programs?
Well, obviously what isn't spent on regional cities would probably go back to the general fund, but what we're talking about now is funding 3 of these regional programs, and I think it's a good one. South Bend, obviously Northeast Indiana, and the Evansville area. It shows, in Northeast Indiana, collaboration has been going on for a while, by necessity, but it's unusual in the rest of the state. And we've had these regional development authorities for quite a while, but no way to really fund them. And this has stimulated that. That's probably the unspoken part of this that's so good, is that it's really stimulating regional cooperation. And those regions that didn't win this time around, I anticipate in the future there will be additional efforts, both locally, without any state involvement, and state involvement as well. It's a good thing for Indiana. We need to think regionally around our state, and this is forcing the discussion in many areas that haven't had it before. I'm blessed to come from an area that's already discussing, and that's why we have 11 counties involved in the Northeast Indiana collaborative effort. So I think there's strong support for it, and the fact that it is a statewide award as well, not just in one part of the state, I think will help it support both here and across the aisle.
Since the Senate is willing to reopen the budget for regional cities, how much more are you guys willing to spend?
We're not reopening the
We're not
budget.
reopening the budget. I would say that would be a misnomer. This is a separate source of money, not in the general fund.
Well, it's in the general fund now.
Well, it's coming from a separate source, non-traditional money, and therefore we can do this, I think, without arguing that we're opening the budget. We're not opening the budget. Okay.
Back to the state road funding, that's absent from the agenda, it's only road funding. Does that reflect the belief that maybe this does need to wait until next year?
No. I think the governor's plan is out there. Certainly the Democrats have a plan as well. And we'll be discussing both here and in the House what is the appropriate approach for the state issue. But we have a specific Senate bill here dealing with local funding, and we think that's important as part of our initiative to support local government in several areas, both transportation-wise and economic development. And we think it's important to push that, and we're doing that in the Senate, but that doesn't preclude us from supporting some short-term statewide transportation needs as well, and we'll be talking about that. We'll see. We'll see who carries that bill. But either way, I know it'll be a topic of discussion in both houses. Yes. To handle what? Would you say again?
Isn't there been a few different ideas on the best way to handle I-step jobs?
I-step? Okay. Okay.
This year, why did the House decide that the whole harmless approach was the best option?
Well, it came through consensus. We've worked with the House, the Governor's Office, the Board, and the Department, including Superintendent Ritz in particular, has been involved in these discussions. But the Governor has, I have, the Speaker has, and our various staffs. And so this has been an effort over months, long period, to look at all of our options. And we finally rallied around the point that hold harmless for 1 year was the best approach. Now, this is something, I know I read that this was Superintendent's idea. Actually, she originally suggested that we do a pause. But I think she came to the conclusion this was a better approach as well, and we all rallied around this idea. I give the Department of Education credit on this. I give the Governor's Office credit, and the House as well, for everyone working together along with the Board to find a collaborative answer to this. And so we think this is the fairest way to approach it. It has caucus support, and it's a one-year hold harmless, as we say, going into a new test with new standards and a new vendor for a test as well. We think this is the right approach.
On the A to F, just one follow-up, so I'm curious, how will this affect the years that people are in sort of the worst designations, and whether they hit the fourth year, certain things kick in on intervention and state takeover? How will that be handled?
Will stay the same, so that all will be consistent. And so if you had an F before, you're going to get an F again, and that'll be part of that 4-year or 6-year, whichever part. I think the 6-year starts now, I think this next school year, so 4-year starts after that, but it'll stay in effect.
But they can improve.
Yes, they can improve. So if it's an F school and they get a C, they get to go up to a C. But if you're a C school and your new grade was an F last year, then you keep a C.
So if you're an F school and you got 3 straight Fs, and this would be different, what happens next year? Does next year come to 4th instead?
No, this would be the 4th year. But I think we changed 6 years to 4 years, and I think the 6 years is still in effect this last year, and we start the 4-year program this next July. So you'd have to be your 6th year of an F. And if that happens, then the state department and board takes over and does a turnaround program then.
So let me clarify something too, Eric, and thank you, Dennis. That's right. It's to make sure, because this gets a little confusing, just so you get this right. Anybody but an F school last year is going to get last year's score, okay, or this year's score if it's an improvement. So if you're D school and you went to an F, you're going to get a D. But if you're an F school and you got another F this year, that is going to count against you. So that part of the equation won't change. But short of that, and we saw a lot of schools drop from C's to F's and things like that, they're going to get a C. It's the continuity of getting S. We're not going to reward an F school and give them a pass because they're going to drop back to an F school anyway. But the question would be, does it not count this year? It will count. Okay, and that's the difference.
And have you guys had discussions with either the DOE and the federal government about how this applies to our No Child Left Behind rate? That's still
There have been a lot of discussions, and I feel pretty confident there's no problem with it. And remember, too, that we're going to a new law as well. And so that new law is going to provide a great amount of flexibility for the states that doesn't exist today. That's very important. That had bipartisan support, and a big thank you to everyone in Washington. For once, we can say that for getting this right, because No Child Left Behind was a real problem for all states, and it had bipartisan opposition. And so we needed this new law. It will give us a lot more flexibility. And knowing that, I think this issue of waivers for these pauses or hold harmless issues that we're facing now, and a lot of other states are talking about as well, I think we'll get strong support from the federal government this year. And it's a one-year deal.
Can everybody stay civil this year?
Hope so. We think we do a pretty good job of that in the Senate, and we obviously emphasize that and make a point of doing that, and I think we do a great job of it here, and I think we will. Now, we're going to have some contentious issues, and the public is agitated nationally on many issues and subjects, and there will be issues in Indiana where that's the case as well. We know that, but we'll continue to encourage a sense of decorum and civility. We don't duck the issues here, and we talk about them and we debate them fiercely, but we do it in a civil atmosphere. And so I'm proud of the fact the Senate represents that, I believe, in a very good manner, and will continue to do that.
You guys
Tony?
have taken a lot of risk in coming out with your own LGBT-related proposal. The Senate's taking the lead on that. Have you heard from the governor where he is on that? And if not, is that a frustration at all?
No, I think the governor is, in a position to speak for himself when he's ready. I think he's watching the debate take place on it initially, publicly, which was our idea. We put it out there early so people could talk about it, debate it, weigh in on it, and certainly people have done that from both sides, and which allows us to shape our discussion, our legislation going forward. So, no, I think the governor's taking the right approach and the prudent approach. Eventually, I know he said he will come out in his own time when he's ready and discuss it, but I think taking his time, waiting for that discussion to take place, seeing how the legislation evolves is the prudent way to approach it. So it's not frustrating at all. It's what I would have expected, and I think that's wise on his count.
Where does Senator Young's super RFRA fit into the Senate Bill 100 debate?
Well, we'll talk about that another time, but it's not a super RFRA, and what he's trying to do, and I'll let him speak about it later at another time, is to try to deal with that issue, maybe in a way that should have been dealt with last year. I mean, we were dealing with a national phenomenon. We were one of 13 states dealing with RFRA. People forget that. And there are already 30 states that had it. So we were fast becoming a majority of 43 states that would have had a RFRA law. The RFRA debate had nothing to do with the law itself. It was all about perception, interpretation, and the evolution of the discussion on LGBT rights beyond same-sex marriage. The discussion has suddenly evolved now to special protected class status, and that was, we were, right in the middle. We jumped right into the frying pan with that. We know that, but the actual law itself, the historic legal interpretation of RFRA, would never allow discrimination. Never has, never will. And it's a deep dive when you get into that, and it wasn't a sexy 15-second soundbite or an easy headline. And we were vulnerable to that, unfortunately. And but what Senator Young's law will do, if it gets a hearing, and I think it will, proposal is to maybe go in a direction we should have gone and deal with all First Amendment rights, and not just one, and not make any particular issue with religious rights, but say all constitutional rights are equal, and maybe there ought to be a standard for all. But we'll let him talk about that at another time. And I respect him for bringing that, and we'll have a good discussion on it.
When will Senate Bill 100 be scheduled for?
Probably later in the month. Yeah. We'll let things percolate a little bit more.
And is that a personal priority for you? I know it's not on the agenda for the...
It's important that we have the discussion in Indiana. I think after what we went through earlier this year, we need to have the discussion. You know, where it goes, as we said before, is anybody's guess. We're not asking anyone in our caucus to support it or oppose it. We're just simply saying, you know, vote your conscience, but keep your thoughts, you know, and your thinking on this open if you can. Listen to all the sides and then vote your conscience. And that's exactly how it's going to be approached in our caucus. That's why it's not up on this board. It's not a caucus agenda item, but we all recognize it's an important issue, and we will have that discussion. That's it? Anybody, any other questions? Okay, Tony. Yeah.
Senator Banks introduced an abortion-related bill that would prohibit it and you could attack the heartbeat. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, wait, I'm just reading it now. You know, I just saw it today for the first time. It's Senate Bill 144, I think. And so we'll see. We have a number of abortion bills that have been filed, you know, pro-life bills, and that's one of them. So most of them, if not all of them, are going to be assigned to health. That'll be Senator Miller's bailiwick. She's experienced, as is her committee on this issue. I know Senator Young has filed a bill as well, and others. And so we'll see where that discussion goes. The Senate is a strong pro-life caucus. Senate Republicans are. We know that. But that doesn't mean we pass every bill. It doesn't mean we don't discuss them all either. We tend to have that discussion. We'll see where Senator Banks' bill goes, along with the other 5, I believe, that have been filed. And that discussion will be shaped later in the month, and it'll be under, I anticipate, Senator Pat Miller's jurisdiction in the Health Committee. Any other questions? Thank you all very much. It's good to see all of you again.